Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Buenos días, tardes o noches, dependiendo de a qué hora estén viendo este video. Y ahora sí, no hay manera de que lo vean en vivo porque estamos grabando. Iñigo, ¿cómo estás?
Hola Mike, ¿cómo estás? Pues encantado de tener aquí a Logan Paulsen. Well, we're very happy to have you here, Logan.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. That's a cool bilingual intro right there. Good job, man.
Oh, thank you, thank you. We have practiced a couple of times. Logan, first of all, thank you. As Iñigo said, thank you for being here. We know you're busy, and thank you for giving us a couple of minutes to talk about football, because as you said, we all love to talk about football, right?
That's right, absolutely. It's the best game in the world, or maybe second best, depending on where you're from. I don't know.
Absolutely.
We're Mexican, and we still think that football is the best game in the world.
Perfect.
So you're cool with that. Obviously, well, speaking of us being Mexican and basically being Latin people,
Yep.
I guess the first question we want to ask, and a lot of people that watches the show also usually ask us, is about Sammis Reyes.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him?
So I actually have been very fortunate to train with Sammis a little bit and kind of see his progression from very early on in the process until basically his first NFL training camp. And one of the things that I think, physically, obviously very, very gifted, big, 6'6", 260 pounds, moves like a basketball player, a very strong guy. But one of the things that I've been most impressed with is kind of his mental fortitude and his mental discipline when approaching the game, and understanding what it means to be a professional. Because I've had the privilege of working with a whole bunch of guys who've made transitions from other sports like rugby or, moving from wide receiver to tight end. And it's very, very challenging. And he seems to have obviously the physical gifts, but I think the mindset, which I've been most impressed with.
Well, talking about Sammis, in your opinion, what is the thing that he has to improve more? The blocking, the route running?
Yeah, so I think
talking about an NFL player.
Yeah, that's a question I get all the time. And one of the things I'd say, I would have to say everything. And I know that's kind of a catch-all answer. Okay. He's never played football before. And, for those of you who've never played football, like you have high school where you kind of learn like basic stuff, like how to get in a stance, how to take certain footwork, what certain coverages are, certain routes are. Then you go to 4 or 5 years of college, that's like on-the-job experience and training and time on task. And so Sammis is really making up for about 9 years of missed football training, so he has so much to learn. And, thank goodness he's a physical specimen, because that gives him an opportunity to kind of, cheat the system a little bit and cut ahead of the line, because there's not that many guys who are 6'6" and can run a 4.5 out there, So I think, he's got a lot to learn. He's got a lot to make up. But I think, like I said, his mindset seems to be such that that's going to be very possible for him.
Okay, and well, obviously, when he signed with the Washington football team, we saw him like a maybe kind of possible second TE behind Logan Thomas.
Yep.
But right now, obviously, John Bates came on the draft, and they signed Ricky Seals-Jones. So suddenly, it looks a little bit harder to maybe even make the roster. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think you brought up some really astute points there, right? I think John Bates is kind of going to be your blocking, complementary wide tight end, the guy that kind of messes with defensive linemen, isn't on the run plays, does a lot of pass protection. He has a very nice skill set for that he's been able to cultivate through 5 years of college. And then obviously Logan Thomas had kind of a breakout year last year, over 70 receptions, and he's the kind of entrenched number one. And I think, Sammis, a lot of people thought, he could be the number 3, but usually the number 3 tight end on an NFL roster really closely mimics that of your F or your move tight end, a guy who's kind of a big wide receiver, can catch a lot of footballs. And I bet you, this is just my hypothesis, I don't have anything to kind of validate this internally, but I think Sammis was a little bit more green during minicamp and OTAs than they thought. And by green, I mean he just was a little bit too novice at the position, right? So he had a lot of learning to do, and that became very apparent. I think they see his potential. So once they saw that he had a little bit more room to go than they thought, they decided to bring in Ricky Seals-Jones, who kind of is a guy who you feel comfortable playing a lot of football for you in this offense going into 2021. So I think there's a really good chance that they keep 4, because I think because of Sammis's physical attributes, you're going to find a way to keep him around. Now, whether that's he's got a roster spot, whether that's, he's kind of on IR for a year. I've been in teams where like they've got a guy with a lot of potential that they put on IR for a year, injured reserve, and kind of kept them around, let them study, let them develop a little bit more mentally and physically. And I think that might be something that's in the cards for him, because I think if he were to go to practice squad, I would imagine that another team would probably pick him up just based on potential. Sure. He reminds me a lot of, I'm not sure if your viewers are familiar with the Philadelphia left tackle, Jordan Mailata, I think is how you say his name. He was a rugby player and then kind of had a long way to go, but they kept him on the active roster for 2 years so that no one could poach him and take him away from the Philadelphia organization. And I think Sammis is in kind of a similar situation to that.
Yeah. Well, this team has a great defense, but it has to improve at offense. Curtis Samuel has arrived. The wide receivers group is pretty exciting, I think. What's your point of view about this offense in 2021?
So I think that the Washington football team has done an outstanding job of attacking its weaknesses, right? So like one of the big weaknesses of the team last year was the wide receiver depth, right? Obviously you have Terry McLaurin, yes. You have Cam Sims, who's a very good player, but I don't think you want him being your number 2 wide receiver. You want a guy, you want more depth there. So they went out and signed Curtis Samuels, who's kind of on the verge of becoming a true number 2, an explosive playmaker in his own right. You sign De'Ami Brown, the wide receiver from Carolina, who's been kind of was the big play threat there. I think he led the FBS in explosive plays over 20 yards. You sign Humphreys, the guy to play the slot. So all of a sudden, this wide receiver group, which was kind of the land of mismatched toys, no one really had a defined role, kind of trying to plug and play guys that weren't really ready to go. Now you have like a very developed room that looks kind of dangerous, and I think is kind of scary. So I think that in conjunction with Ryan Fitzpatrick joining the team, like now all of a sudden you can take advantage of this speed on the outside. You can push the football down the field. You can make plays that maybe Alex Smith couldn't make or didn't feel comfortable making given his physical state near the end of the season last year. So I think I'm very excited to see where this offense goes from a skill position standpoint. And then offensive line-wise, I think there's a little bit of a question mark. You let go of Morgan Moses. You signed Charles Leno kind of late in the offseason. You signed Sam Cosmi to be your starting right tackle, and I think he's got tremendous potential. I really liked his draft stuff. And if you check out my Instagram, Logan_Paulsen82, I do a draft breakout of him there. And I think he could be very good, but he also could be very average. So I think we'll see how that group can kind of conjoin and join together to really let that receiving group kind of be the best version of themselves. Because if they can't pass protect, they can't push the ball down the field. So,
yep.
And speaking about position players, like skill players, today we got the news that Logan Thomas extended the contract with the Washington football team. Sounds like a very smart move. What do you think about that?
I personally love the move. I think, first off, I'm just very happy for Logan Thomas. I think he's a guy who's been kind of on 1-year deals for a long period of time since he's made the transition from quarterback to tight end. So it's really nice, after putting in all that work and kind of going through all this adversity to get paid and let your family kind of have a nice little nest egg. I think it was a good sized deal. I think it was like $5 million a year for 2 years, basically. And that's awesome for his family. I think it's the right decision. I think he kind of played himself into like a top 10 guy at the position, to be quite frank, which is pretty exciting for the Washington football team. I know he's a little bit older. I think he's 30 or 31 years old. But, you're not committing to him for 5 years. You're committing to him for 2 years. So I think he's going to be a really good football player for the next 2 seasons. And I think the Washington football team identified not only his play, but his leadership style and his presence in the locker room, especially on a young team.
Well, yeah. The quarterback position last year was pretty much a mess with all the injuries and that. And now we have Ryan Fitzpatrick and the project of Taylor Heineke. Ryan Fitzpatrick can be Ryan Fitzmagic or Ryan Fitztragic. So what could that be for Washington football team?
Right. That's a good question. I think a lot of people have asked me about that. And I think one of the things about Fitzpatrick that's really interesting is over the last I wish I could remember the number. I think 2 seasons, he's shown a positive trajectory in terms of his overall play and production, his passer rating, touchdowns to interception ratio. So I think you're getting a Fitzpatrick this sounds funny because he's 37, 38 years old, who's kind of starting to play his most consistent football. And that seems odd, but like, if you look around the NFL, you look at Aaron Rodgers, you look at Tom Brady, you look at some of these other older quarterbacks, they seem to be kind of having a more staying power in the NFL. And I think a little bit of that's because of the rule changes. They protect quarterbacks a lot more. Coverages are a little bit simpler in terms of you can't press receivers the same way. So I think there's a good chance that he becomes a very dynamic playmaker for the Washington football team. And you see more Ryan Fitzmagic as opposed to tragic, you know what I mean? And I think that bodes really well for the Washington football team, because in addition to kind of having more consistent quarterback play, he's got a stronger arm than Alex Smith did. He can push the football down the field. I don't want to say he's a better decision maker, but you have a better decision maker than Taylor Heineke, for example. And I think a lot of people have been pulling and really advocating for Taylor Heineke, and I'm not sure that he's ready yet. And so it's nice to have a guy like Fitzpatrick, to kind of helm the ship for a while until that all gets resolved.
Yeah, and suddenly that also seems like a very smart move, but because now we see quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson and Aaron Rodgers maybe making their last season on their current teams.
Yeah,
looks like a possibility that maybe next year Washington can maybe get Rodgers or Watson or someone like that. So that sounds like a cool option, right?
That would be really interesting. I was actually talking with someone today about what the trajectory for the team is, and one of the things that came up was the Allen extension, which I don't know if we're going to talk about that or not. But Allen, they gave him $70 million over 5 years, great deal for him. But when you give out deals like that, you start extending people, you kind of limit your options in terms of quarterback moving forward. You're kind of showing that you're banking on getting a quarterback in the draft as opposed to a quarterback in free agency, because traditionally those quarterbacks in free agency kind of are a big financial number for the team, right? So if you're allocating funds elsewhere, you're really limiting your accessibility to that big signing in free agency. So, I would love it if they got a guy like Aaron Rodgers. I played in Houston. I know Deshaun. Obviously the stuff he's going through from a legal standpoint is not ideal, but I was super impressed with him when I was there from a football standpoint. And so I would love it if he was here, legal issues aside. And but I think they're kind of handcuffing themselves a little bit with some of these extensions that they're putting out.
Yeah. Talking about the Scott Turner, this offense is very dynamic. The Scott Turner's offense, I think, pretty cool names. We have in Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick. Personally, I think the best offense, the best way the offense moves is by balance the passing game and the running game. What do you think about the Scott Turner approach?
So I'm kind of excited to see what Scott Turner brings to the table this year, because one of the things I thought that was a little disappointing under the helm of Dwayne Haskins was the offense was very simplistic, and you didn't get to see kind of the full flavor of Scott Turner's offense, and only kind of, and then you saw it for a couple games when Allen took the helm, and then it kind of regressed a little bit with Alex Smith, not from a mental standpoint, but from a physical execution standpoint. He just couldn't push the ball down the field the way it needed to be pushed. And that's not a criticism of Alex. That's just an observation. And I think now you've kind of resolved those issues at the quarterback room. I know people don't love Ryan Fitzpatrick because of his inconsistency, but he does make good decisions when he's playing well, and he can push the football down the field. And I think you add speed to the outside. I think you're going to get to see Scott Turner's full bag of tricks. You mentioned Gibson. I would love to see him more involved in the passing game. That's something we didn't get to see that much last year, in a very similar way, the way they use Chris McCaffrey in Carolina, right? And then obviously all of that kind of stems off of the running game. And that's kind of the modern NFL offense, is finding good balance between your run game and your pass game, and finding ways to keep those rushers off balance. And I think people look at a team like Kansas City and they say they throw the ball over the yard, but they find ways within that offense to mitigate the pass rush, draws, screens, different kind of quick bubble hits that kind of play like run game. And here, because they have such a dynamic runner in Gibson,
and it's a best,
the run, they don't need to kind of get into that kind of gimmicky version of the offense. They can run the football and throw it down the field.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously we have to, the questions are with the offense, but we need to also talk about the defense, because that's what makes us proud as Washington fans right now.
That's very true. Very true.
You just mentioned the Jonathan Allen extension. Some people think that, I also read that by giving that money to Allen, you're basically giving up on Daron Payne. Maybe that's the route. What do you think about that?
So I think that's exactly what you're saying. You can't give too much money to one position. I think everybody everyone in the DC area, every Washington fan throughout the world, obviously they're all over the place. Mexico, right? You probably want to keep all of those guys. You want to keep Chase, you want to keep Sweat, you want to keep Payne, but all of them have kind of played themselves into elite money at the position, right?
Yes.
So when that comes up, you can only extend a handful of them. So you kind of got to say, who would we prefer? Do we want Sweat or do we want Chase? Do we want Payne or Allen? And I think that, one of the things that I came away with, and I've talked to a couple people who agree with this in the building, in the Washington football team building, is that they preferred Payne. You know what I mean? But I think, Allen is a local boy. He's played well. Like, it's not like he's playing poorly. He's really good friends with Dan Snyder, and that is impactful on some of these deals. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. I think he's playing well. This isn't a criticism of him in any way. But I've talked to people who think that Payne was the guy they should have signed. They should have waited for Payne because he's a better athlete. He's more explosive. He does better stuff, more dynamic stuff, kind of in the vein of like a Fletcher Cox as opposed, you know what I mean? So I'll be curious to see how it all shakes out. Maybe by the end they end up cutting out. They cut Allen and they sign Payne. You never know. 3 years is a long time in the NFL.
It could be the thing at the locker room, but by Jonathan Allen, or just it was his time and it was his fifth-year option, and then you have to sign him.
Yes, I think that's also part of it. It's the time, right? So he's the first one up, so he gets the first look, right? I think that's another factor that's important to consider, and I think that's a great point. So, yeah, it's multifactorial, and it's sometimes not all about who's playing the best football. It's about the timing of it, and I think a little bit of that's in play here. Again, I think he's playing well. I think he's a great asset for the team, so I don't want to diminish that in any way, but I do think there is some nuance to it that needs to be addressed.
Okay. And you just mentioned something that sounds very interesting. By choosing Allen, they are maybe giving up on Payne.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something like they have to decide between Montez, Sweat, and Chase Young. Yeah. Sounds terrible as a Washington football team fan. Honestly, why do you make me choose between Montez, Sweat, and Chase Young?
It's like Sophie's Choice. You got your two babies, right? It's like, who do you pick? And I think now, I think most fans would pick Chase, right? So I think in a couple of years when Sweat's up, I think, what is that? This is his third year, so fourth year, the following year, unless they can get him extended at below market value, he's going to hit the free agent market, or they're going to trade him, and they're going to get some value for him that way. So that's what I would keep an eye on for if I'm a Washington football team fan, because I think ultimately, I think the owner, I think the coaches, I think everybody prefers Chase over Sweat. So.
Well, yeah.
Vicky, I know. I'm the bearer of bad news. Yes.
Yeah, that's a problem. But talking about the draft, Jamin Davis, the fifth defensive player that has been selected in first round. What can he can bring to the team?
So I think that's a really cool question. One of the things you talk about when you watch Jamin's tape is he's really good in coverage. He reminds me a lot of Levante David from Tampa Bay, who's kind of the premier cover linebacker in the NFL. And so if you look at the NFL now, it's not the same that it was, 10, 15 years ago. Now it's a pass first league. 60% of the time teams are passing, and that's on first and second down. So, as much as you want the linebacker to be like a run and hit stud, you'd prefer that they can match concepts and cover really well. And he shows that ability in spades. Again, if you want to check out my Instagram, Logan_Paulsen82, I did a video about him there, which I think kind of talks about some of the things that he does really, really well. And so I think coverage is kind of paramount. I think he runs. I think he runs very nicely. I think he's got good physicality. I think at Kentucky when he was playing there, they kind of told him to soften up a little bit, if that makes sense, against the run. I kind of play pass first, play pass to run. And so some of his run stuff looks okay, but there's other times where he looks really dynamic. He's a sure tackler. He's not afraid of contact. So I would expect him to elevate that group immediately. And in my opinion, he's in contention for Defensive Rookie of the Year before the season even starts. So I think, if you look at traditional defensive rookies of the year, it's been defensive linemen. There wasn't any really big defensive linemen drafted this year. Quarterbacks have been struggling mightily in the NFL over the last 3 seasons, rookie quarterbacks. So I think it's going to be a linebacker. Obviously, you could make an argument for Zaven Collins in Arizona, but he's kind of a tweener. I think a guy who's going to come in and start and be really impactful right away is Jamin Davis. And I think he's going to make a huge impact to this team almost immediately.
Yeah,
sure. And in order to start closing out this little chat, what do you expect from the Washington football team this year? How many victories do they make to the playoffs?
So I would say, if you would ask me a couple weeks ago, I would have probably said yes. That's my expectation now. I don't want to put a modifier on it. I think they do get to the playoffs. I think they're gonna kind of be able. They put themselves in a good position to repeat what they did last year. However, if you look at the teams around the division, like Dak Prescott's back in Dallas, the New York Giants have got tremendously better in terms of their offense. I think they've got a guy that you feel good about potentially being a franchise quarterback. And this is kind of Daniel Jones's make or break year, the quarterback for the Giants. Can he be their franchise guy? He's shown flashes of it. He makes good decisions. But does he have that special seasoning that makes him an elite quarterback? And this is the year you get to find out. That defense, I thought last year was pretty outstanding, and they've kind of retooled and upgraded that in a nice way too. So if I'm the Washington football team, it's going to be pretty stiff competition. I think Philadelphia is in a rebuild probably for the next year or two, depending on whether they can get a quarterback and depending on how Jalen Hurts is playing, depending on what they can do with some of those older guys in the defense there. But I think the division has gotten a lot better, because if you think about who the Washington football team played, the Dallas teams they played, they were playing Andy Dalton, some guy I've never heard of from a small school. You know what I mean? And if you look at the Giants, they had no wide receivers. Barkley wasn't playing. You know what I mean? They were shells of themselves. And so how do you handle kind of the full versions of both of those teams? It's going to be tough for the Washington football team for sure.
Yeah. Well, Logan, thank you for your time. I think, Mike, if you have any questions, I'm done with that. Thank you for your time, for being here in the show. And we're follow him. He has told his Instagram account. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Like I said before, this is super awesome to meet guys, fans of the Washington football team that are not in the continental United States. So awesome, man, and keep up the good work, man. I think you guys did a great job.
Oh, thank you very much. And yes, we will put obviously the link to your Instagram account on this video on YouTube and on our social media. And also, if you want to maybe send a message to all the Latin American fans, Spanish fans of the Washington football team.
Yeah, so I would just say, I think this forum you guys have created is awesome, because it shows the Washington football team fans and football team fans, American football team fans outside the country, that there are more guys like you, and that the sport is growing abroad, which is fantastic news. And I'm super excited for that. And, let's go Washington football team.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as we say here, we say the show is called Somos Washington. It means we are Washington because of the Ron Rivera video.
Okay.
Remember that first video when he was talking at the end of the day, the name changes, we will change. And at the end of the day, we are Washington. That's why we translated that. And
yes, very cool. I love that. That's awesome.
That's awesome. So Somos Washington.
Somos Washington.
Somos Washington. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Logan. Y bueno, a todos los que vieron esta entrevista, muchas gracias. Y pues ya saben, si le pueden dar like a este video y suscribirse a los canales, pues todo eso se agradece. Logan, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. That's so cool, man. That's awesome. Good bilingual there. Nice job, guys.
We practice. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you.